So on the 30th of this month, the Zimbabwean Exemption Permit in South Africa will be discontinued. The move is being fought by civil rights groups, with judgment being reserved on this matter. For more, let's bring in Muchengeti Hwacha, who's the Executive Director at NGO Asylum Seeker, Refugee and Migrant Coalition. Joins us via our video link this morning. Great to have you on the program, Muchengeti. Thanks for making time. And that is the sticky issue, right? There's litigation around this that's ongoing. Judgment has been reserved. Do you see government being able to essentially end these permits in the absence of some kind of finality from the courts?
I think what's going to be necessary is for the whole of the South African community to get a determination from the court. And mind you, it might not end at the High Court. From my indication, the applicants in the matter, if they are unsuccessful, excuse me, do plan to appeal. So it may still be a long way before we get a final determination in the matter.
Right. And that, again, really doesn't solve the issue for many people, of course, who are affected by this. I mean, the figures I have is upwards of 178,000 Zimbabweans who are relying on this piece of, or on this document to be in the country legally. It's worth taking a few steps back. I mean, government is arguing in part that the permit was never meant to be permanent.
Yes, the permit was never meant to be the permit was never meant to be permanent, and my understanding is that the minister uses the discretion he has in the Immigration Act to carve out an exemption, taking into consideration the social, economic, and political situation in Zimbabwe. However, the situation in Zimbabwe hasn't changed fundamentally, and so although the permit shouldn't be permanent, there has to be some sort of accommodations with the fundamental issues that gave rise to the permit haven't changed.
Yeah, and what does that look like in a context where I'm sure the minister's discretion would consider whether or not South Africa can continue accommodating those more than 178,000 people who are in the country?
So one of the considerations that I've been looking at myself was this permit these special exemption permits. This is not the first time they've been implemented in South Africa. A similar thing would happen for the Angolans, and in that circumstance, when the temporary permits came to a conclusion, there were avenues provided for Angolans to stay permanently or to be voluntarily repatriated. So I think that kind of a solution would be something that would be more lasting and long-term, and I think fair to both sides of the argument.
I mean, if that is going to take place, I mean, I'm not quite sure what the numbers look like for the Angolans, but I mean, do you reckon that even scaling it to accommodate, once again, the people who are affected in this instance is something the government can actually successfully carry out?
I think the program has been successfully done before. We managed to accommodate the 178,000 people in more turbulent, I think, economic times. So I don't think it's really a question of can the society accommodate these people. I think it has been, and to take it a step further, I think these people have actually been contributing to our economy in a myriad of ways. You'll know that most of the ZEP permit holders are either working or studying or running businesses. So I think that the question of accommodation doesn't really come to the fore. And if it did, I think the minister would have been able to prove that before the court. My understanding from following the proceedings, they haven't been able to sufficiently prove that. But obviously, we'll wait for a final determination from the court.
Right. It almost sounds like the kind of discussion that doesn't necessarily only have to start and end with litigation, you know. Hopefully, there are some kind of diplomatic avenues that could also be explored here. And from my knowledge, none of that has really happened. Do you find that strange?
My understanding, there have been some bilateral discussions between Pretoria and Harare that has yielded some sort of accommodations from the Zimbabwean government for potentially returning Zimbabwean permit holders. But I think that also speaks to the issue that Helen Suzman is pursuing in the court, that there wasn't sufficient consultation with the affected persons. And in circumstances where there wasn't such sufficient consultation with affected persons, that would be an affront to the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. And that is the thrust of the Helen Suzman Foundation's case before the court.
Yeah. Again, you know, all we can do right now is build scenarios, right? So we are running out of time. 30th of June is the cut-off date, and as we already spoke, the court is yet to give some kind of final determination. If the 30th of June arrives and the court still hasn't come out with their final judgment, how do you envision that moment playing itself out? Because those who are obviously against these permits being scrapped are warning, quite frankly, of chaos at that time if we don't have clarity.
I think chaos is definitely possible. What may happen is that these 178,000 people, including families, so the number may actually be bigger, essentially become undocumented. And we already have an issue of a large number of migrants being undocumented in the country, and this only exacerbates the problem. We're hoping that the courts can come back with a determination before the cutoff date, but there's no telling whether that will happen or not. There are some people who have been able to apply for waivers, but given the massive backlogs at the Department of Home Affairs, many still haven't received outcomes on those waivers. So the future for these people really remains uncertain, and I think it's actually a travesty of justice.
Yeah, well, this might be an unfair question, but I mean, we've seen this being postponed before. Sounds like there may very well be another postponement.
Yes, that may very well be on the cards as a temporary measure. And as I mentioned earlier, there has been an indication that at least one of the parties would appeal in the event that they are not successful. So we could still be in court for a long time to come. Obviously, there's the Supreme Court, and then after that, the Constitutional Court. So some sort of accommodation may need to be made in the interim by the minister. Absolutely.
And in the interim, of course, so many people waiting anxiously to get a sense of how their own lives will be affected. Muchengeti Hwacha, thanks for speaking to us. We'll watch this and see how it unfolds. Our relationship, of course, with Zimbabwe goes back decades, and it'll be interesting to see how we handle this moment.